Hey guys, in this video I'll be continuing to compare the newer characters' stories as to how they obtain their visions with their counterpart Sephiroth in the Tree of Life. So if anyone was wondering if I altered the claims I had made about Genshin's visions and Gnosticism, let's find out, because I've already put forth how each vision is obtained, so the newer characters will either prove or disprove what I already put forth. So today we'll be covering the children of the House of Hearth, Lynette, and Freminet. Lynette seems like a magician's assistant. However, in truth, she's not only a magician herself, but in reality, she's an undercover agent for the Fatui. Lynette's story started off harder than most. Being poor and orphaned at a young age, with her brother who is also a child to be the very one to take care and look after her, led to much suffering and longing for a better life. Many freezing nights and going to sleep starving. At first, Lenny's stories of great heroes with visions gave her hope that their lot in life could change if they perhaps prayed, wished, or hoped hard enough. However, the gods never took notice of them and granted them a vision. So Lynette stopped relying on them or a vision being granted. She could only rely on one person. The one person she always could, which was Lenny. Having not only started off life like this, but also being told by the very person that taught them street magic that the world is full of lies and falsehoods, and that he hopes that one day they can find their own truth. And soon after being betrayed in the cruelest of ways by someone that they thought was their salvation, she knew once again that Lenny was the only one that she had, the only one who really cared. However, being rescued by Father of the House of Hearth that day gave them at least an opportunity for more, even if it's sketchy. And since the House of Hearth is an orphanage run by the Fatui to raise new and efficient members, this is why the three characters in today's video are in the Fatui. Anyway, they endured harsh training and supported each other through countless missions the house sent them on. However, one day their mission was to infiltrate and obtain incriminating evidence from their target, which lived on a cliffside villa. The mission was ordinary and easy for them. However, in the distance they saw a flare, a message from their family go off, pretty much telling them that they're doomed. As fate would have it, too many forces were already headed their way, with the odds being highly likely that they're not only going to be caught, but that them being caught would also expose their family. And so they did the only thing that they thought might allow them to slip away unnoticed, though it was extremely dangerous, which was to jump off the cliffside into the waters below. And so they took each other's hand tightly and jumped. Lenny, trying to take on the blunt force of the fall damage for assist, led to him being instantly knocked out upon hitting the waters. Lynette panicking, her lungs taking on water herself, desperately trying to keep her unconscious brother afloat and drag him to shore. Once on shore, Lynette coughing out water and the shearing pain in her lungs, she frantically checked on Lenny's condition. He was pale and cold, but alive. She held him tightly to prevent his temperature from dropping any lower. And before them, a dark forest, but with lights moving through the trees in their direction. She tried to wake him in a panic, but was met by nothing but his fragile and weak breathing. The fear and loneliness of that horrible night seized her heart once again. But it had been so long. They had been through so much. She had grown from that, or so she thought. Why then were things like just before? Could she do nothing but wait for someone to come save her as she trembled in the darkness? No, she thought, it should have been different. They had made many miracles by their own hand and conquered many obstacles. She had wished to stand beside him, supporting him back to back and shoulder to shoulder. With the forces closing in on them, she feared calling out to her family for help, nor could they stay put. Knowing this, she hurled him over her shoulders to try to make their escape, but the path before them through the forest was in complete darkness, so she would just hear her way forward. Extending her ears as high as she could, she would listen for the slightest wisp of wind, pushing ever forward through branches and thorns that scratched and punctured her constantly. But little by little, her sight became clearer. Perhaps her ears had grown used to the wind, her eyes accumulated to the darkness, as her steps grew more and more agile and resolute by the moment. Lynette, though exhausted and in pain herself, blindly carried Lenny through the dark forest back to the rendezvous point, and using the last of her strength, Lynette tried to hand over the evidence to Father, who was waiting there for them. However, from exhaustion, her legs gave out, taking Lenny down with her as she fell. Father, however, seeing them falling, as well as the incriminating evidence, allowed the incriminating evidence to fall and chose to catch both Lyney and Lynette from hitting the ground instead. "Sleep now. You achieved a far more valuable prize," Father said, as Lynette's vision silently grew at her waist. So how Lynette obtained her vision, does it align with Gnosticism? So in Gnosticism, this vision is called Foundation, and in Genshin, this one is called Freedom. This one's resonance is about dreams and imagination. Some of its traits are selflessness, altruisticness, loyalty. It's also about unifying, communication, contact, and connection with the external realities with the soul. To unlock this vision, your soul has to already resonate with that vision, which Lynette's does seem to. But then you have to also do one of these key actions to actually unlock it. One of them is being hit with personal truth. 2 is honesty, even if it's twisting words. 3 is a drive to verify a connection in a task. And 4 is testing authenticity. Things like this is how this vision would be obtained. And the core point of all of this is basically truth. However, don't think it's that simple. It's not about not lying or not being lied to. It's supposed to be so powerful and monumental that you get spiritual knowledge, gnosis, from this truth. Also, don't forget that to obtain any single vision at all, one needs to obtain sovereignty and self-governance. If you want more details of how animal works or how any vision works, you can look at my newer video on the topic, which is Archons, Visions, and Tree of Life Explained. But moving on to the next story for now. After Lynette had unlocked her animal vision, the missions she was sent on grew more and more difficult and dangerous, and only vision wielders could succeed in the most dangerous missions without getting exposed. And so Lyney and Lynette started to operate separately more and more. And since the siblings had been together since childhood, Lyney was unable to adapt to this new way of things, and he knew Lynette felt the same. He needed to be by her side, lending his help any way he could, and this was not negotiable. However, believing his desire for power wasn't any longer pure, this would imply to him that he was undeserving of vision, yet he still needed one to bridge that gap in power between him and Lynette, and so he asked Father for a delusion, so he would be capable of working with Lynette. Father seemed to have stared into his very soul in intense silence for a bit. She then asked, would Lynette want this? Her simple and yet powerful question cut through the very strings that bound his heart, and in a daze, Lyney knew his sister would never accept this. To allow him to use the delusion for any reason at all, let alone to help her? In this moment, he realized how ridiculous what he was asking was. Father then told him and left him with his own thoughts. This is not the first time you lacked power, but you always found an answer before. Lyney then locked himself in his room to contemplate the meaning behind Father's words. When they lived on the streets, it wasn't power that got them by. Lyney then tediously went through every single mission report, analyzing every single detail. He then started to make comprehensive plans for his sister's missions, using his understanding of her to design more suitable routes, making more practical tools, and choosing the very best rendezvous points. So now when Lynette goes to leave on missions, their gaze into one another's eyes would no longer be such a strain, as they would know they would happily be embraced by the other one at the rendezvous point. Anyway, sometime later, and though they had successfully completed dozens of missions at this point, I don't think Lyney accounted for betrayal, which is what they were facing. This means that Lynette's movements were exposed, and the siblings found themselves in an almost identical situation of the day that Lynette had obtained her vision. However, this time, Lyney was ready for anything to go wrong, to make sure he would always have a way for her to get home safely. And so, he opened his emergency paraglider, grabbed her, and jumped off of the edge. However, gunfire rained in their direction. Lyney tried to avoid as many shots as possible, however the glider was riddled with holes, which caused them to start to plummet to the ground. Lyney, however, was annoyed, and he wouldn't allow himself to despair, nor to allow his plan to save his sister to fail. Their pursuers, however, snickered, knowing that a fall from that height at that speed would surely mean death. That is until they saw a flame light up the very sky and pushing their glider in the direction of the river. The power of pyro to change the direction of the fall, and the power of animal to protect them from harm. Lyney didn't question how or why his vision was obtained in this moment, as it was no longer important. So the way that Lyney got his vision in Genshin, does it align with his counterpart Sephiroth in the Tree of Life in Gnosticism? So in Gnosticism, this one is might and severity. And in Genshin, this one is war, which is pretty similar in the overall meaning. And the resonance behind the Sephiroth are things like passion, but it's also about anger and violence and aggression. And it is also calculated, cautious, and serious. It's It's about strength of boundaries, setting limits, and self-control, which seems very Lenny-ish as he's so serious and tedious and meticulous about these details to make sure that she gets home safe every single time. And obviously even the thought of failure would completely distress him. It would completely infuriate him, put him in anger or even distress. So he's extremely passionate about this, about his sister, about that life, about keeping her alive, about being her protector. But that's the resonance though, which clearly he's matching. But how does one actually unlock this vision if you already resonate with it? The way you unlock this vision is when something completely terrifies you, but puts you in awe of it and inspires you at the very same time. This is how you obtain that vision. Next is Freminet. One day he was out on an underwater mission with other children from the House of Hearth, and everything was going smoothly when out of nowhere his intuition kicked in. He knew they were in great danger, though he didn't know why. It didn't matter because he trusted his intuition. It had helped them evade all kinds of dangers many times. So Freminet made an emergency gesture to the others, telling them to surface. Though he still didn't know what the danger was, his nerves had taken hold. His heart began to beat faster and faster. As the others didn't object, Freminet led the way to the surface. However, he started to get dizzy and couldn't breathe. His equipment was malfunctioning. Are the others' equipments also malfunctioning, he wondered, as he tried to open his eyes. However, he was slipping out of consciousness. No, I have to lead them back, he said to himself, as long as my arms and legs keep working. But he began to feel sleepy, and his thoughts were becoming sluggish. If this carries on, he thought, I'm never going to make it to the surface. Even if I make it, what good would it do? That thought suddenly flashed through his mind. I'll just go back to living day after day, eternally devoid of hope. He felt tired of forcing himself to keep going. He was unsuited to having so many family members. There was no real warmth or feeling between them. They were all just like little cogs in a machine. Perhaps the seawater is where he belonged after all, to drift into a blissful sleep. Was it really so bad? He thought as he gradually let his eyes fall shut. A sound suddenly jerked him back awake. Freminet. Freminet. The voice was slow and solemn. It seemed to be coming from the other end of the earth, and it carried a slight stutter. Pear? Freminet stretched out his arm to a blank landscape in front of him, opening his eyes in puzzlement. There was no Pear, the penguin in this underwater realm. But he then noticed the children had all slipped into a dreadful torpor. I must save them all, Freminet screamed out without making a sound. So what if we're not all of the same mind? I won't abandon anyone in my family, no matter the hazards that lie ahead. Only with the courage to put one's own life on the line will I live to see the blue skies that come after the storm. In that moment, his body seemed to have been imbued with power, and now he was able to breathe once again. He then quickly swam over to his companions as each of them were drowning. In the midst of a tempest, he saved all of his friends. A miracle of heroism, worthy of the legendary Pear from his stories he loved so much. It was only then that he realized that a vision as clear as crystal now hung from his diving suit. He never told a soul what really happened that day. After all, true heroes aren't in it for recognition. So how does Freminet's story compare to how you're supposed to obtain this Sephiroth in the Tree of Life in Gnosticism? So in Gnosticism, this one is about understanding. In Genshin, however, they haven't told us exactly what this one is yet, but I'll get back to that in a bit. However, the resonance or mentality for this one in Gnosticism is supposed to be things like seeing things from a higher perspective, fleshing it out, formulating a story. It's about form and limitation. It is logical, analytical, and organized. If you've seen my other videos, you know that so far the other visions are aligning with the Sephiroths from Gnosticism pretty accurately. So it's safe to assume that this one is also going to align pretty accurately, meaning that it's probably going to be something like understanding as well. If not, perhaps it'll be something like pain, grief, depression, or isolation. And you may be wondering, why the heck am I bringing up these words? They may have nothing to do with this Sephiroth or vision. The reason I bring it up is because the meaning behind the Sephiroth, the core point of it, is these things. It's supposed to be understanding. When you understand how this world works, the rules, the gods, the archons, its people, you understand that all of it has darkness. It's cruel and evil and against you. And that can make you distrust it. That might make you dislike people and distrust people because you know what the world and its people are like and you don't want to feel that pain. And so you put on armor. but because of those layers of armor, it's hard for people to see that you even have a heart. And again, these people with this cryo resonance are like this because of how the world treated them, what their lot in life was. The world, it didn't show them kindness. Everything was pain and a struggle and grief. I always dread having to learn a new cryo character's story because I always know it's going to be depressing. They have to be depressing. The reason this one has to be like this in Gnosticism is you're supposed to understand that the world is dark and evil and cruel and rigged against you, and there's only pain and grief and misery. You're supposed to realize this, yes. You're supposed to suffer with this knowledge, but then you're supposed to have the insight to see past this cloud of darkness and see that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You're supposed to see that there is sunlight after the storm. It will pass. There is light at the end. That's the point of this. The reason it's like this is because the key to unlocking this vision and completion and not just getting stuck in a rut of what its resonance is about is simply joy. And I know, like, for other types of people, like maybe pyro and stuff like that, maybe you're happy all of the time, maybe. But for people to have this resonance, they don't have joy in their life. They just have pain and misery and suffering and struggling and grief. But when these specific people that are resonating with cryo, then they acquire joy by some means. They see that light at the end of the tunnel. They see the sunlight after the storm, that there's some good that comes out of this. That's when they get this vision. That's how it's always going to be. Anyway, that's about it for now. However, if you guys want to see any of the other character stories as to how they obtain their visions, as well as does it align with his counterpart Sephiroth in the Tree of Life, as well as if those characters even resonate with theirs, then I probably have a video on it, or I'm working on a video on it. But anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I hope to see you next time.